Speed changes everything in warfare. Not the speed of decision-making, though that matters enormously. The speed of the weapon itself. The entire architecture of modern missile defense, billions of dollars invested across decades of development, rests on a single physical assumption: that a sufficiently advanced sensor network, processing fast enough and connected to interceptors capable enough, can detect, track, compute an intercept solution, and launch a defensive weapon that reaches the incoming threat before the incoming threat reaches its target. Every missile defense system ever deployed, the American Patriot, the Israeli Iron Dome, the Russian S-400, operates within the physical envelope that assumption defines. Tonight, Iran has received 603 M22 Zircon Hypersonic anti-ship and land attack missiles from Russia, and the Zircon does not operate within that physical envelope. The Zircon was designed specifically to destroy that envelope as a military assumption. Let me explain precisely what Mach 9 means in the context of missile defense, because this number is where everything else in tonight's analysis begins. The Zircon travels at approximately Mach 9 in its cruise phase, and is reported to achieve Mach 9 in its terminal attack phase as well, which is the dimension that makes it fundamentally different from systems that achieve high speed in boost phase before slowing during terminal approach. At Mach 9, the Zircon covers 1 kilometer every 3.6 seconds. Its reported range is approximately 1,000 kilometers. A Zircon launched from Iranian territory would reach Tel Aviv in approximately 60 seconds of flight time from crossing Israeli airspace. Not 60 minutes, 60 seconds. The standard intercept sequence for a sophisticated air defense system, from detection through track confirmation, threat classification, fire control solution generation, and interceptor launch, requires a minimum of 30 to 45 seconds under optimal conditions, with pre-queued radar systems already tracking the threat vector. Against a Zircon traveling at Mach 9, the physics of the intercept sequence consume the time available before the weapon reaches its target. Here is what you need to understand about why 600 Zircons represents a threshold that is different in kind rather than degree from previous Iranian missile acquisitions. The Zircon's hypersonic speed creates what defense analysts call a compressed decision timeline, but that phrase understates the actual physical reality. 60 seconds from Israeli airspace to target means that Israeli missile defense operators, assuming perfect sensor coverage with zero latency and perfect fire control computation, have approximately 15 to 20 seconds to complete the intercept engagement from the time they have sufficient track confidence to launch. 15 to 20 seconds is not enough time to execute the intercept sequence against a target moving at the Zircon's velocity with any currently deployed interceptor system, because the interceptors themselves cannot accelerate to a closing geometry in that engagement window. This is not a solvable problem through software upgrades or crew training improvements. It is a physics problem. And the Zircon was designed by Russian engineers who understood that problem and solved it in the weapon's favor. The 24 hours referenced in the title requires direct and honest unpacking, because the word surrender is not rhetorical hyperbole, but requires clarification about what specific strategic situation it describes. It does not mean that Israel would literally capitulate militarily within 24 hours, which would not be credible given Israel's own substantial military capabilities, including its nuclear deterrent. What it means in the operational planning context that Israeli and American defense establishments must now confront is that the previous Israeli strategic assumption, the assumption that Israeli air power and missile defense could impose decisive costs on Iranian offensive operations while maintaining acceptable levels of defensive effectiveness, has now collapsed within a 24-hour decision window about how to respond before the Zircons are fully dispersed into operationally deployed configurations across the Iranian strategic landscape. In strategic terms, the collapse of that assumption represents a form of compelled strategic revision that operates as a forced choice under severe time pressure, and forced choices under severe time pressure have historically produced outcomes that the party making them would not have chosen under less constrained conditions. The Russian decision to transfer the Zircon to Iran requires the same structural analysis applied to previous transfers, because understanding Moscow's decision logic is essential to understanding where this trajectory leads. The Zircon represents Russia's most advanced anti-ship and land attack missile system, the system that Putin specifically highlighted in his 2018 address announcing Russia's new generation of hypersonic weapons. Transferring it to Iran represents a significantly more consequential technology-sharing decision than the transfer of the Kaliber or even the S-500, because the Zircon's hypersonic capability represents the frontier of current weapons technology in a way that the Kaliber, while highly capable, does not. The questions that this decision raises within Russian strategic culture about technology security, about precedent setting for future transfers to other parties, about the operational intelligence that Iran's employment of the system might reveal to American collection, these are questions that Russian strategic planners would have debated seriously before reaching this decision. The explanation that structural analysis provides is the following. Russia has crossed a threshold in its confrontation with American-led Western power that has fundamentally revised its technology transfer calculus. Before February 2022, Russia operated within an implicit framework in which severe military escalation with the West remained a scenario to be deterred and avoided rather than prepared for. After February 2022, and especially after the comprehensive Western economic response to the Ukraine invasion and the military assistance provided to Ukraine, Russia's strategic planners have been operating in a framework where Western Russian military confrontation is a real scenario that Russian planning must address. Within that framework, enabling Iran's military capacity to impose the maximum possible strategic cost on American regional operations is not reckless escalation, but rational strategic competition. Every American asset diverted to the Iran theater is an American asset not available for the Ukraine theater. Every Israeli strategic problem created by Iranian capability expansion is a problem that occupies American diplomatic and material attention. The Zircon transfer is Russian strategic competition expressed through Iranian military capability, and understanding it in those terms reveals both its logic and its trajectory. Now, let us examine what the transfer means for American carrier operations in the Persian Gulf and adjacent seas, because this is where the Zircon's specific design philosophy intersects most directly with American power projection doctrine. The United States Aircraft Carrier Battle Group represents the most consequential conventional power projection platform in the American military arsenal. A carrier battle group provides the mobile airfield, the strike range, and the defensive envelope that enables American military power to operate far from American territory. The Persian Gulf has hosted American carrier operations continuously for decades, with carrier presence providing the credible deterrent backdrop for American diplomatic and military engagement across the entire Middle Eastern theater. The Zircon at Mach 9, with a 1,000-kilometer range, deployed on Iranian territory that extends to within 300 kilometers of major Persian Gulf shipping lanes, creates an engagement envelope that places American carrier battle groups within range of hypersonic strikes, against which current carrier defensive systems have no demonstrated countermeasure. The specific technical challenge is not merely the Zircon's speed. It is the combination of speed with a sea-skimming terminal approach profile and a claimed terminal maneuverability that allows the weapon to conduct evasive maneuvers during its terminal phase. American carrier defense systems, particularly the SM-6 and the CIWS Phalanx, are designed against targets with more predictable terminal approach geometries. A Mach 9 weapon conducting terminal maneuvers is challenging not because any individual defensive component fails, but because the combined demands of tracking a maneuvering hypersonic target, computing an updated intercept solution, and launching an interceptor capable of achieving the required closing geometry within the available engagement time exceed what current systems can reliably execute. Let me now address the scenarios that the structural logic of this situation generates. And I want to be particularly precise about the probability assessments, because this is where honest analysis most clearly separates from advocacy. Scenario 1, the deterrence calculation changes. Iran's acquisition of 600 Zircons fundamentally revises the American operational risk assessment for any military action against Iranian nuclear or military targets that would require carrier battle group presence in the Gulf. American military planners who previously modeled carrier operations in the Gulf as a manageable risk environment must now incorporate the Zircon threat as an unresolved operational challenge. The probability that this revision produces a measurable reduction in American willingness to deploy carriers in the Persian Gulf in high-tension scenarios is high, roughly 70%, based on the historical pattern of how militaries respond to the introduction of credible threats against their most valued platforms. Scenario 2, the technological response race. The United States accelerates development and deployment of hypersonic defense systems specifically designed to address the Zircon threat envelope. The American Glide Phase Interceptor program, which has been in development since 2019, represents the most relevant existing program for this purpose. Accelerating it to operational deployment is possible on a 3 to 5 year timeline with sufficient funding priority. Whether that timeline produces operational defensive capability before Iranian Zircon employment changes the regional strategic situation is the central uncertainty in this scenario. Scenario 3, diplomatic resolution under new terms. The Zircon transfer creates sufficient urgency in American strategic calculations to drive a diplomatic engagement with Iran that offers terms significantly more favorable to Iranian interests than previous negotiating frameworks. Iran, holding a newly acquired capability that creates genuine strategic leverage, negotiates from a position of strength rather than sanctions pressure. The probability of this scenario producing a durable agreement depends entirely on whether American political conditions permit the kind of substantial compromise that genuine negotiation with a party holding real leverage requires. The observation that I believe carries the most analytical weight in this specific development is the following. The Zircon transfer is the third major Russian military system transferred to Iran in this analytical series, following the Kaliber and the S-500. The pattern of these transfers, from precision cruise missile capability to advanced air defense to hypersonic strike, logical architecture, precision standoff strike, defensive shield, and now time compression of the offense-defense competition through hypersonic speed. These three transfers, considered together rather than individually, describe a coherent military architecture designed to achieve a specific strategic outcome: the denial of American and Israeli conventional military options against Iranian territory at acceptable cost. That is not the military architecture of a country preparing for limited defensive operations. It is the military architecture of a country preparing for strategic confrontation with a major military power. The analytical obligation is to state that clearly, whatever the political inconvenience of doing so, the structural forces are pointing where they are pointing, and the obligation of honest analysis is to follow them there.